Okay, so today we're diving into something kind of controversial,
Yeah.
but super fascinating. I think
Yeah.
it's this whole question of, a possible second Trump presidency and what that could mean for the world.
Right.
We've got a ton of sources here, news analysis, expert opinions, historical context, and we really want to cut through all the noise and really understand the global implications,
Well, sure.
not to endorse or condemn Trump or anything like that, but just try to figure out, what a potential return to the Oval Office for him could mean.
Absolutely. I think one of the most interesting things here is that it seems like, the global community, they're not just passively watching U.S. elections anymore.
Right.
Trump's first term and everything he's done since really showed the world that American politics can have huge ripple effects everywhere.
Absolutely. And the sources we're looking at don't hold back at all.
No, they don't.
I mean, we're seeing descriptions of the global reaction as everything from dangerous and foolish to scary and even terrifying.
Yeah. Terrifying is a word that comes up a lot.
It does. And,
Yeah.
and I remember back to the 2016 election,
Oh, yeah.
that sense of disbelief, almost denial in places like Brussels at the UN.
Oh, totally.
It was like they couldn't even wrap their heads around the idea of a Trump presidency.
It was unthinkable, and then
Yeah.
it happened. And I think that initial disbelief has really morphed into some very concrete concerns. And it's not just about, Trump's personality or his, unconventional style.
Yeah.
There are real anxieties about policy
Right.
and the potential consequences for the world.
Absolutely. So let's get into some specifics.
Okay.
Because one of the big things that jumps out from these sources is Trump's stated intention to just tear up the Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
And this was a deal that a lot of countries saw as a huge step towards peace and stability in the Middle East.
Well, it's important to understand why that deal was seen as so significant.
Yeah.
It was negotiated over years. With all this back and forth, and it put these really strict limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for, lifting those crippling economic sanctions.
Right.
The idea was to give Iran a way to re-engage with the world, reduce the risk of them getting nukes and promoting more stability in the region.
Right.
So to just tear it up, like Trump said he'd do, would not only, reignite the nuclear issue, but also really damage America's credibility as a diplomatic player on the world stage.
So it's not just about Iran's nukes. It's about America's commitment to diplomacy in general.
Exactly, working with other countries to solve problems.
And if America is seen as going back on its word,
Yeah.
walking away from agreements like that.
Yeah, well, that's where the instability comes in.
Right.
Because other countries start to wonder, can we trust the U.S. to keep its promises?
Yeah, and that leads us to another big area of anxiety.
Right.
The future of these alliances,
Yeah.
especially NATO.
Yes, NATO.
This cornerstone of transatlantic security. Right, an attack on one is an attack on all.
Exactly.
But Trump has been really, really skeptical of NATO.
He has, demanding more money from other members,
Right.
questioning whether NATO is even worth it.
Right.
I mean, that's got to be rattling nerves all over the alliance.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember, NATO is about sharing the burden, but it's also about shared values.
Right.
Democracy standing together against threats.
And I'm just thinking, put yourself in the shoes of a leader from, say, Albania
Okay.
or one of the Baltic states.
Countries right on Russia's doorstep, basically.
Exactly. Already feeling the pressure from Russia. And then they see this wavering commitment from the U.S.
Yeah, their supposed protector.
Right. And what does that tell them?
It's a really unsettling message, I think.
And the consequences of that could be huge.
Huge.
We're talking about a world with all this geopolitical competition, and the U.S. is potentially alienating its allies.
Especially the ones who are most vulnerable.
Exactly. And speaking of Russia, we can't talk about global anxieties without talking about the war in Ukraine.
No, we can't.
I mean, this conflict is casting a shadow over everything.
Absolutely. And Trump's public statements haven't really helped calm anyone's nerves.
No, not at all.
He keeps hinting at ending the war quickly,
Right.
but with no real plan.
Yeah.
Which makes people think he might push Ukraine into making concessions to Russia.
Right. Basically rewarding Russia for the invasion.
Exactly. And that's a scary thought.
It really is. I mean, to think that the fate of Ukraine, a country fighting for its survival, could depend on who wins a U.S. election.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is. What does that say about America's commitment to democracy?
And the rules-based order.
The idea that countries should follow the rules,
Right.
not just invade their neighbors.
And that's where perception comes in.
Yeah.
Because the world is watching.
They are.
And they're judging.
Right. And if America is seen as unreliable or weak,
Yeah.
That has implications way beyond Ukraine.
Absolutely.
This is about global power dynamics.
Right.
America's credibility, the
Yeah.
future of democracy itself.
It's all connected. And then you add in this whole thing about Trump's admiration for these strongman leaders.
Right. Putin, Xi Jinping.
Kim Jong-un, Orban.
Yeah, and it's such a contrast with his relationships with America's traditional democratic allies.
It really is. And it's not just a difference in style, you know.
Right.
This is about values.
It really is.
Fundamental values.
It's like he's signaling a shift in alliances.
Yeah.
Moving away from democracy towards something much more well-authoritarian.
And that raises a huge question.
Yeah.
If America, the supposed leader of the free world, starts siding with authoritarians,
Right.
what message does that send to everyone else? What happens to the fight for human rights and democracy around the world? It's a really unsettling prospect.
It really is.
And I think it's at the heart of a lot of these global anxieties.
Absolutely.
People are worried about what a second Trump term could mean for the balance of power, for the future of democracy, for the world as we know it.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's important to think about it.
Absolutely, and that's what we're here for.
Exactly. We need to understand these anxieties if we want to find a way forward.
I completely agree.
So let's keep digging.
Right, let's do it.
I mean, it really challenges the norms.
Yeah.
You know, the things we thought we could count on. And it raises concerns about this sort of domino effect, you know, like democratic principles eroding on a global scale.
Yeah, and it's not just Europe that's, on edge here.
Right.
Our sources also talk about anxieties in other parts of the world.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Middle East and the Asia Pacific
when
it comes to Trump's foreign policy.
Absolutely. I mean, take the Middle East, for example. His approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was very much in favor of Israel.
Right.
And a lot of people argued that that just made things more unstable in the region and alienated some key players.
Yeah, and then there's the whole Iran situation, which we already talked about.
Right.
The potential for conflict there has consequences that go way beyond the Middle East.
It does. Global energy markets, regional security, international relations.
That's all tied together.
Yeah. And then you have the Asia Pacific, which has become so crucial on the world stage.
Right.
And I'm thinking specifically about Trump's dealings with China.
Yeah. And his stance on Taiwan.
Right. Those were really unpredictable. And, his trade war with China, while it was trying to address some real economic issues, it was also handled in a way that just really escalated tensions and messed up global supply chains.
Yeah. And his comments on Taiwan, a self-governing island that China claims as its own, that created so much uncertainty.
It did.
And the possibility of military conflict.
Yeah, and any escalation involving China, a rising superpower, would have huge global consequences.
Absolutely. I mean, as I was going through these sources, one thing that really hit me was this feeling of, like, history repeating itself.
Oh, interesting.
The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Right.
The abandonment of the Kurds in Syria.
Yeah.
It's like we're seeing echoes of these past foreign policy blunders.
Well, you've hit on a key point there. Looking at the historical context is so important for understanding these anxieties about a potential second Trump term.
Yeah.
Because the sources are drawing these parallels between what he did before and what he might do again.
Right. And maybe even on a larger scale.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that Afghanistan withdrawal for a minute.
Okay.
The images of that hasty exit, the lack of coordination with allies, the chaos at the Kabul airport.
It was rough.
It was a huge blow to America's credibility on the world stage.
Absolutely. And the sources point out how that event, along with other foreign policy decisions during Trump's first term, really contributed to this perception of the U.S. as an unreliable partner.
Right.
When a country backs out of commitments without talking to its allies or planning things properly and just leaves everyone hanging, it really damages its reputation.
And its ability to build trust.
Exactly. And the way the Kurds were treated in Syria was particularly bad.
It was heartbreaking. They were so instrumental in the fight against ISIS.
They were.
They risked their lives alongside U.S. forces.
And then
Trump just pulls U.S. troops out of northeastern Syria.
Yeah.
Basically leaving the Kurds to fend for themselves against a Turkish offensive.
It was seen as a real betrayal.
It was widely condemned.
Yeah, it sent a message that America's commitment to its partners could just vanish.
Right.
Depending on who's in the Oval Office.
And I remember his justification for it, or at least his attempt at one.
Oh, yeah.
He said that the Kurds didn't help us fight the Nazis in World War II.
How did you add the other 4,000
seriously,
people?
it was widely ridiculed, and I think it really showed this lack of understanding
With
of
your support
history
on November
and
5th,
geopolitics.
America will
Absolutely,
be
and it
bigger,
really
better,
highlighted
bolder,
these
richer,
concerns about
safer, and stronger
impulsiveness,
than ever before.
disregarding expert advice, a very transactional approach to foreign policy. And all of that could have really disastrous consequences on a global scale.
Absolutely. So we're looking at this complex web of anxieties.
We are.
Unease about Trump's unpredictable nature, uncertainty about alliances, worries about America's commitment to democracy.
Right. With authoritarianism on the rise.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is, and the sources we're looking at paint a pretty stark picture.
Yeah.
They're suggesting that a second Trump term could really shake up the international order,
Yeah.
destabilize entire regions, undermine democratic values, and embolden these authoritarian regimes.
Like the world is holding its breath,
Yeah,
watching and waiting to see what happens next.
right, because a lot is riding on this election.
Yeah, and not just for America,
No, for everyone.
but people all over the world.
And remember, change doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's a long process. It takes persistence, patience, and a willingness to work together.
Across our differences.
Exactly. So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listeners with a sense of hope,
Okay.
a sense of possibility.
I like it.
Because yes, these anxieties about a second Trump term are serious,
They are.
but they also present an opportunity.
Okay, an opportunity for what?
An opportunity to re-engage with the world,
Yeah.
to recommit to our values, to work together to build a better future.
A more
Stay updated
peaceful,
and secure
sustainable
yours
future.
as soon
Exactly.
as
I couldn't
it's
have said it better
released.
myself.
Well, thank
Together,
you.
we will
The
make
world is
history in
watching.
America,
They are.
secure
And
your
they're waiting to
piece
see
of
what America
American
does
greatness
next.
today.
So
Thank
let's
you,
show
and
them
God
what we're
bless
made of.
America.
Let's do it. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.